My godfather, who was pretty much my dad, had a mild stroke whilst I was at college across the country. I came back home when the semester had ended. The combination, the stroke, a bad back, and diabetes were taking their toll on him and made it very hard for him to walk. He used a quad cane, but sometimes his legs would unexpectedly give out on him, and he would fall most of the time and couldn't muster the strength to lift himself back up. So here I am back at home and taking care of him pretty much 24/7, and I get to the point where I've become such a light sleeper from worrying and the stress that every time he gets up or moves around too much, I wake up. If he gets up to use the restroom, I wake up with him and wait for him to go do his business and come back before I can even think of sleeping again. We were pretty poor. He was a hoarder and the house was in disrepair, so we both shared the same room with a window unit AC to keep us cool. Instead of a door, he put up one of those extending poles and a thick plastic shower curtain, complete with ridiculously noisy shower rings. He made sure to yell at anyone who wouldn't close it shut behind them, and never failed to do it himself. So one night, I wake up to the sound of footsteps behind me. I'm facing the wall, and it's near pitch black. So I do my usual routine of waiting for my godfather to do his thing. I hear the steps behind me to the door, the shower curtain and rings being flung aside, and then steps leading off to the other side of the house. I lay there waiting for what seemed to be about 5 to 10 minutes, and I started to get concerned. As I'm sitting up to go check on him, I realized that he has violated his own cardinal sin of closing the shower curtains behind him. Not only that, but those steps were way too fast and heavy. At that point, I feel needles go up and down my spine. As I jump out of my bed, I grab the aluminium baseball bat that I have for security as I'm looking out of the open curtains down the hallway, trying to make out anything in the dim light. That's when I hear a cough from the other side of the room. My godfather had been laying in bed this whole time. My first thought was someone had broken into the house, so I gripped the bat, scared as hell, and proceeded to walk around the entire house, ready to bash someone's skull in. But I never found anyone, or any sign of a break-in. Needless to say, it was very difficult to sleep that night. I had just finished my last patrol of the night at an apartment complex, and I was just about to get into my patrol car in the parking lot when I heard a guy shouting at me from somewhere up near top of the apartment building. He was on the 14th floor, I believe, and was screaming for police. I had no idea what the hell was going on, and I scrambled into the building and up to the floor that I thought he was on. Nope, wrong floor. And I take the stairs and run down the hallways until I find his apartment. He was surprisingly calm, although very rude. He told me it took me long enough and that he could have died. When I get to his door, it looks like he'd been on a 5-day booze and meth binge, and I wasn't wrong. His arms were covered in self-inflicted wounds, and I asked him if he would mind if I placed him in handcuffs for the safety of both of us. He actually agrees, and so I put him in cuffs and let him sit on a chair near the front door. His apartment is littered with cardboard boxes, empty beer cans, and obvious drug paraphernalia, crack pipes used, needles, latex tourniquets, and, what I recall, being a couple of lines of cocaine on a countertop. I ask him how he got his injuries, and he tells me that he did them to himself. Naturally, I ask him what he used, and he pointed me to a razor. He then goes on to tell me about how I can call him insane if I want, and goes on a rant about how people are spying on him from his balcony. Clearly I'm not comfortable with this, so I have my dispatcher contact the police. I let him know that the police are on their way, and he's cool with that, until I tell him that we need to go to the lobby to meet the police, as they do not have access to the building. At this point he becomes extremely irate and lunges at me. I'm not sure what he was planning to do whilst being handcuffed, and I wasn't taking any chances. I used some awesome kung fu shit that I had learned in a self-defense course, and the guy goes down on the ground. I inform my dispatcher in the change of situation, and pick up the guy and fight with him down the stairs. I had to stop on every floor in order to get him to stop resisting, because some of his self-mutilation was fresh, and I had blood all over my gloves, clothes, boots, and there was blood all down the stairs, and where I'd had him up against the wall on every floor. I could just imagine the people waking up in the morning and seeing a trail of blood leading from the top of the stairs all the way down to the bottom. After reaching the lobby, my backup arrived and helped me get the guy under control. The police had apparently been given the wrong address and showed up 45 minutes later after they'd been called. From the start of the incident to finishing the report, I worked an extra hour and a half, and have never taken such a long, thorough shower in my life. Even then, I still feel like I need a wash. This isn't my only story though, as before this, I worked as a security guard in a large shopping mall situated downtown. I saw a drunken man fall off a balcony and land headfirst on the ground below. He lived, but had some seriously nasty wounds. The sound that makes is one I will never forget. Another incident is a man with an apparent mental handicap used the mailroom of an attached business tower as his bathroom. A large puddle of piss, accompanied by shit, smeared down the wall. You could tell he was squatting up against the wall. How he got into the tower was beyond us. Didn't see him enter when we viewed the security camera footage. We only saw him leave. On another occasion, I was patrolling a construction yard and saw a guy rave dance in the middle of the yard. Clearly not supposed to be there. I was shocked, and as I approached him I inquired to exactly what he was doing. He didn't react in the way I would expect for someone rave dancing. Out of the blue, he stops his dance, reaches into his back pocket, and produces a very large knife. Without a second thought, he lunges at me with it. I was completely unprepared, and he hits me straight in the chest. Fortunately, I was wearing my stab vest, so there was no penetration, but he broke the protective plating within the vest. It was a pretty hard stab. He stood there for a moment when he noticed that I was okay, and I managed to detain him. But my God, for those few seconds that you see a knife rushing towards you, you think it could be the end. And that is absolutely horrifying. That feeling of utter fear and terror, knowing that your life could be over in mere seconds. On another occasion, I was patrolling a Ford dealership and I notice a guy peeking into windows of cars on the lot. I ask him what exactly he's doing, just striking up a conversation to try and find out who he is. Before I even finish asking him how he is, I found myself staring down the barrel of a handgun. I was scared shitless, again in another situation where I was quite confident that my life could very well and truly be over in a matter of seconds. I find myself unable to move, except my arms, and my hands went up over my head before I even realized what I was in the middle of. I clearly remember hearing the firing mechanism click against the bullet, but fortunately, through some kind of miracle, it didn't fire. Without thinking, I pressed the emergency alert button on my radio. I ran and ducked behind a car, and immediately described the suspect in as much detail as I could. Police, K9 and helicopters dispatched, and find the guy hiding under a CO.AG tractor in a nearby heavy equipment dealership. On another occasion, I was patrolling a rather sketchy apartment building with my partner, and we found ourselves having to arrest some chick for assault by trespass, as she spat in my partner's face whilst we attempted to escort her from the property. She did not live there and had no reason to be in the building. A guy, unrelated to the incident, saw me trying to place my handcuffs on this chick and decided it would be a good idea to football tackle me. I find myself unable to breathe and coughing up blood. Contusions to the left lung was what caused that. While defending myself from a drunk, high 6'5", 200-pound man, as I'm 5'7" and 170 pounds, backup arrives along with police, and we tackle and arrest the man for assault, as well as assault on a peace officer, and he tried to trip and kick one of the police officers. When the court date finally came, he showed up wearing a leather jacket, dirty jeans, a ripped t-shirt and smelling of weed. He shouted in court, claimed I tried to get him in a headlock, which wouldn't have been relevant anyway, and needless to say he was convicted. When I was working at the mall, I was dispatched to one of the parkades attached to the mall, and was after a woman who called our security office via help phone. The dispatcher tells me that the woman was hysterical and unable to explicitly say what was wrong, but on the security cameras, there is a car near the help phone, parked in a stall with the front passenger door ajar, and what appeared to be blood on the windshield. The driver is in his seat but not moving. Fearing the worst, our entire team rushes over there. When we arrive, my supervisor tries to get the woman, who has blood all over her, and tell him what happened. I look in the car and see a young man in his early 20s passed out in the driver's seat, pants down, and a very much severed penis, only attached by some flesh. The car had strobe lights inside, the kind that are activated by the stereo system's base, and he was apparently an epileptic. She was giving him head when he had a seizure, and he's still profusely bleeding. So I grabbed gauze from my medkit and attached to a drop leg holster device on my leg and apply pressure to this guy's crotch. Police, fire and EMT arrive, and during extrication, they accidentally tear his penis off. That was an interesting report to write. I think he did manage to get it put back together. As for whether it worked or not, I will never know. On another incident in the mall, just after closing up from public access, we were heading back to the security office to do a briefing when my supervisor, myself, and our regional manager witnessed an attempted suicide. A guy tried to jump off the 3rd level balcony and landed on the escalators on the 2nd floor. I ran up to the adjacent escalator, which was moving downwards, and hit the emergency shut-off button when I reached him. Broken bones galore, and some seriously nasty gashes on his face from the grooves of the escalator steps. Emergency services and the fire team arrive, and he is transported to hospital. I don't think he was successful in his endeavour, and I'm glad he wasn't. I don't know how well he got patched up, but I hope that kid's doing okay. A few years later, I was patrolling a subsidised condo property that the company had a contract with. Very sketchy area. We're walking around when we hear some shouting, and we move to investigate. We saw a guy throw a rock through one of the condo's front windows, so we try and run after him. He gets into his car though, and peels off out of the parking lot. We're instructed by our supervisor to follow him in our patrol car, and that just happened to be right next to us, so we do. He notices that we're following him and decides to take off at a high rate of speed. By this time, police have already been notified. We follow him until he turns off the road and onto a major freeway. We speed up and follow him as safely as possible, giving the police dispatcher directions. The guy, who was going at least 160 kilometers an hour now on a 70 kilometer per hour road, loses control of his vehicle and slams into the concrete median and a light pole. The impact sends the vehicle into the air and rolls over, ejecting the guy from the car. He was seriously messed up. Human meat and debris from the vehicle litter both sides of the freeway, which was empty at this hour, thankfully. He was still alive, but his face was mostly destroyed. He was rushed to the hospital, and we were interviewed by police, and my partner spoke to someone from the local news stations. We were told to go home early. Last I heard, the guy was in a vegetative state in our trauma hospital. On another incident, patrolling a subsidized apartment building for at-risk inner-city retirees, essentially a nice way of putting homeless men over the age of 55, I walked in on a legless prostitute laying on the floor of our rec room, pants down, and playing with herself. She reeked of BO and booze, and the smell of crystal meth, and I could smell her for at least 10 feet away. She was a regular there, and had previously been banned from the property. I didn't want to arrest her. Honestly, I didn't even want to touch her. But she had an arrest warrant, and was advised by police to hold her on the property. I managed to coerce her to pull her pants up, and bum her way down the stairs to the main floor. The police arrive, and they didn't even want to touch her. Honestly, I felt bad that she was living such a life, but at the same time, it's just nasty. These types of things have happened to me since I was 13 or so. In just about every house that I've lived, as we moved a lot growing up. The first time I remember anything weird was with my closet. I would shut it at night, but it would be open in the morning. For a week or so, this happened. One night, something woke me up. I had bunk beds in my room, and was laying on the bottom bunk, staring in the dark room. First, I noticed the closet was open. Then I noticed a crouched human-like shadow figure at the bedroom door. Like in the doorway. I just panicked. I jumped and pulled on the curtain chain on my ceiling fan, but it was off at the switch next to the door. I ran to the door and flipped the switch, only now the light was off still, because I had pulled the chain. I was sobbing at that point. I ran back to the chain, and the light came on that time, and there was nothing there. I don't think I've ever been so terrified. I convinced myself that it had been my mum's friend staying in our guest house pulling some kind of prank, though no one ever admitted to it. Nothing ever happened again at that house. I would come home from work to find my toilet seat up, and all my curtains opened. Opening the curtains was something I never bothered to do at 17 years old. especially since I left for work at 4:30 a.m. It happened every day. At night, I would flush the toilet, and I heard steps walk through the kitchen. My mum agreed to let me take the family dog to live with me, because I was so creeped out. I was sure someone was coming in whilst I was gone. He was aggressive. I would never allow anyone in the house. I came home one time to find the dog had actually torn up the curtains, which is creepy now, but I wrote it off as separation anxiety at the time. Still, the toilet seat was up every day after work, and my dog heard the flushing and footsteps as well. He would bark and growl and stare into the kitchen with his fur standing up. Another apartment, a bell or alarm thing started going off randomly. It was hidden behind ceiling tiles. It even went off after we cut the wires. Still had no idea what the bell went to, and the landlord didn't know. Finally, we tore it out and threw it away. My current house, I've had things move in front of me. My dog barks at corners, and one night, my touch lamp turned on, and still occasionally does, completely independently. Not to mention that someone, who clearly wasn't there, had tried opening my bedroom door in the middle of the night. My door doesn't shut right, and there's no need to turn the knob. You just push and it opens, yet someone was jiggling the knob like it was locked. My husband yelled, "Come in," thinking it was my sister, but no one came. I got up a few minutes later to see what she wanted, and she swore it wasn't her. It follows me everywhere. I'm pretty used to it at this point. As long as there's no scary crouching shadow people, I think it's pretty cool. When I was little, I used to be exceedingly paranoid, to the point I would bathe with the door open. I personally blame it on my brother, who loved to freak me out. He would constantly bullshit 10-year-old me with stories about dreaming of people at the window looking in. I know now that most of this was fake, but at the time, I didn't. I was bathing with the door open per usual, soaking up the warmth around me and enjoying myself. What happened next? I don't expect the majority of you to believe. Perhaps I was getting tired or something, but as I looked out into the hallway that my bathroom leaked out into, I shit you not, I saw a grayson white figure hobble past the door. Naturally, I started crying, and when my parents called out to see what was wrong, I told them what happened, and wasn't leaving until one of them got me. Cut to 5 years later. I'm living a normal life. Nothing weird has happened since then, save for the onset of some very mild clinical depression. I'm staying at my friend's summer home in Palm Springs for a night. I doze off surprisingly quickly for sleeping on a futon, and that's when I have the dream. I wake up in my own bed at home, except everything is off. The only way I can describe it is as the dark blue light filling the room having its own viscosity. It's like it was coating the room as opposed to filling it. Then things get weird. I see from the hallway that my room is connected. A greyish figure hobbles into the room. Lanky or gangly doesn't even begin to describe this thing. It looked like someone with the build of a basketball player had been starved to death, brought back and starved again. I couldn't see its face from where I was, and frankly, I didn't want to. It waddled its way over to my bookshelf, opposite of where I was facing, and just sort of crawled up it and clung there. It looked down on me and asked me with a voice that sounded more like it was coming from across the street than across the room what I was doing. The voice was concerned, and at the time, I didn't think about responding. I'm used to just viewing my dreams as opposed to taking part in them, and for some reason, I didn't feel scared, and it proceeded to tell me its job was to watch me. I opened my eyes and saw it was around 4 a.m. I was relieved to be back in my friend's bed and clung to the pillow because it was nice to feel something soft in my arms after that. Only now, I have connected the possibility that that thing was the same thing I saw when I was small. But it doesn't end there. I am not a very superstitious person, and I'm sure you'll all understand how confused and worried I was by this. I had a chat with one of my friends who was more educated in the occult about it, and they couldn't give me an answer, but did offer to perform a banishment ritual, which I politely refused. A few days later, I was drifting off to sleep when I heard what can only be described as either trilling or a really weird laughter. Think turkey noise. I immediately recognized the far-off voice, but again, did nothing. At that point, I felt myself being grabbed by the upper arm and lifted, but being dropped onto the bed. I then felt it happen again, but this time was dropped onto the floor. I assumed I was dreaming and went back to sleep. I woke up the next morning by the bed on the hardwood. I hadn't sleepwalked in about 3 years, but assumed it was that. I went into the restroom to freshen up for the day and found red marks around my shoulder area, resembling claw marks, in the exact same place, as if I had been picked up by something. Around 3 or 4 years ago, my family was looking to buy a house. We ended up touring a house in a very secluded neighborhood. It was a brightly colored house, and it was very old. It was 2 stories and very pleasant to look at. The realtors took us inside, and instantly, I got a creepy vibe from the house. It had a long front hall that led into the living room. However, when you first walked in, if you looked to your right, there was this huge staircase with an actual Harry Potter looking room underneath it. The downstairs furniture was very old, and nothing, and I mean nothing, matched. When we went upstairs, the house had Jack and Jill rooms, meaning they looked exactly alike. It was creepy as hell. Me, having anxiety-induced paranoia, asked the realtor if in the state of Tennessee, they had to tell you if somebody died in the house you were looking, or even buying. When my family heard that, my father made us all get into the car and leave. One thing that made it even creepier was that the realtor looked pissed when I first asked that question. I looked online and found the house had been up for sale 15 times in the past 5 years. I also found out that in the 80s, after it was built, the first couple that lived there were brutally murdered. The wife was found upstairs in the crawl space connecting the bedrooms, and the husband was found in the little Harry Potter closet, which I sat inside for about 10 to 15 minutes, while I listened to the realtor talking about the living room. I still get the creeps when I think about the fact that I sat in the exact same spot they found a dead man about 35 years before. My close friends and I used to hang out and do stupid shit in the middle of the night on weekends in high school. One night, when we were a few drinks in, at around 2 or 3 a.m, hanging out at one of our parents' houses, someone mentions how he heard this story of how this old guy / ghost wanders in the street in the middle of the night on some specific road near us. The rest of us look at each other like this sounds really dumb. But whatever. We're all a little buzzed, bored, and not wanting to pack it in for the night yet. So we pile into one guy's truck and head to this street. The road we were looking for isn't exactly in the middle of nowhere, but surrounding it are a lot of dirt roads, one of which we travelled down either by accident or curiosity. So we find the street that this supposed ghost wandered down, turned down it, and slowly idled down it. It was a fairly normal street, with houses and deep ditches on both sides. Within 10 seconds of turning onto the street, we see a figure moving along the side of the road in the truck's headlights. It was one of those "are you seeing what I'm seeing" moments, where we murmured amongst ourselves as the truck crept closer to this object. Sure enough, we tentatively crept up behind what turns out to be, no shit, an old man sauntering down the side of the road at about 3 AM. What the hell? The friend who's driving pulls up in front of the guy and matches his speed with how fast the old dude is walking. The guy is walking with purpose, but has a very cold demeanor to him, like he has no idea we're right in front of him. We all start yelling at him, "Hey, what are you doing walking on the street at this hour?" We get no response. "Hey, old guy, can you hear us?" Nope, just still slowly marching. So the driver thinks it would be helpful and funny to slow down. I will never forget what happened next. When we got within a few feet of him, he reached his arms out and lunged at us. I think just about all of us jumped out of our skin and shrieked to high heaven. Instantaneously, we screamed for the driver to floor it, and he took off like a bat out of hell, probably oblivious to the reason why. We get to the end of the street, our hearts are pounding, and we're all like, "Did you see that?" Our adrenaline starts wearing off, and one of us has the bright idea to circle back and make another pass. Most of us want to get the hell out of there, but curiosity or peer pressure prevails. No less than 30 seconds after we floored it down the street, we're approaching the same spot to encounter this guy again, and maybe get a better understanding of what happened. We're near the spot we just took off from, and there's nothing in sight. We head down the street a little further, and there's no sign of this person. We must have spent the next 10 minutes walking around checking all the houses, ditches and everything for a sign of that guy's presence. We circled the road again more than once. It was like he vanished into thin air, and there was nowhere for him to go. I will never forget the first image of seeing this person walking down the road, nor the absolute terror when he lurched towards us all, nor the disbelief when he disappeared the second he was out of sight. A long time ago, I worked at a base in Japan. Now, most US facilities in Japan are former Japanese bases, and most we share with the JSDF. One particular night, I was guarding the fuel depot. No creepy, spooky history, just a bunch of big hills where fuel tanks are buried. There is a Japanese neighborhood just beyond the perimeter fence, so seeing people walk around and house lights coming on are common. Most of the watch, I sit in a guard shack at the only entrance and exit. It's a big automatic gate that only I and the office, which is locked because the fuel guys go home at 6 PM. So I'm locked behind 12 feet of fence, spanning a 200-yard area with only one entry point. This particular night, As it's February, it's around 10 degrees outside, so I cringe to have to do my rounds because it's freezing outside. But oh well. On around my third trip, I spot what looks to be a person sitting on one of the mounds. I walk up and flash my light on them. Nothing. Making my way to the next row, I climb up a mound and look back at the previous row. And there it is again. A person just sitting on the top of the mound. I hold my butt over there to the previous row, running about 5 mounds to where the spot is, and again I see nothing. I make the rest of my rounds and walk back to the guard shack and turn around, and the thing or person is now around 10 feet away from the guard shack. I jump inside, block the sliding door, and just stare out the window. I really studied this thing. There are floodlights every 20 feet or so in place, so it's actually decently lit up. At one point, I get out and use the Japanese phrase we learned in security training, Tomare itsuzo, which means stop or I'll shoot. But to this day, I don't know why. It wasn't doing anything. But what was I supposed to do? It was so cold outside, and it barely moved. Its hair was short, cropped around the ears. Body was average for a young Japanese adult, and its clothing looked grey. About 20 minutes later, my relief came and flashed its light so I would open the gate. I looked and saw the security vehicle hit the gate button, and looked back, and it was gone. I didn't even tell my relief, because we probably wouldn't find anything anyway, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I work at a Remax Suburban as the front admin, and haven't heard of anything like this, but I was actually house hunting myself, and know for a fact a house I went to look at was haunted. My husband and I pulled up to the house, and this had to be around the 30th house we went to see. I started feeling sick and nauseous, and didn't want to go in. My husband convinced me to go in, however, because it looked nice on the outside. The house was vacant. It smelt old as soon as you walked in, and there was old antique stuff everywhere. The basement reeked like death, and the second I put my foot down, I almost vomited everywhere and went back to the middle of the stairs. My husband and our realtor were completely fine in the basement looking around. He then convinced me to come look at an old bar down there, so I held my breath. There was a separate room where the washer and the dryer were that I hadn't gone into yet, so they were looking around, and out of nowhere, a phone starts ringing. Keep in mind this property is vacant. I was following the sound of it, and no phone was ringing upstairs. It was in the room with the washer and dryer that none of us had been in yet. I started walking slowly towards the room, and every slow step, the ring got louder and louder, and as soon as I reached the doorway, I realized I had to turn the corner to find the phone. I froze, and I ran upstairs and went out the house. I scared the shit out of my realtor and my husband. As soon as I got back outside, my nausea went away. I know this place was haunted. It didn't help that when we left, the realtor expressed that someone had actually killed themselves in that house only about 10 years ago. Guess that explains it. When I was around 14 or 15, we lived in a nice house, in a nice neighborhood. However, at the end of the neighborhood, there was a small, little house that sat abandoned for years. All the kids liked to sneak into the abandoned house at night to prove that they had the balls to do it. I was never that kid. Eventually, I had 3 friends staying the night, and of course, my hot neighbor suggests that we go into the house. I regret it now, but at the time, I didn't want to look like a wimp, so I accompanied them. It's 2 in the morning, and we sneak out of my house. We are armed with flashlights from our cell phones, and one actual flashlight. As we approach the house at the end of the street, we notice the grass is so tall that if we crouch down pretty low, it would completely conceal us, and that all the visible windows and doors are boarded shut. After a few loops of the house up close, we find 2 windows into the basement of the house, unboarded. One seems like it was never boarded up, but covered by the tall grass and missed when they were boarding it up. And the others look like it had been deboarded. Me and my hot neighbour are looking in through the never boarded window into the basement, and the other guys are looking in through the other. Everyone gets up and starts discussing which window to get into the basement from, but I keep looking around the basement with my light. From my angle, I can see the stairs, but the stairs aren't like 1-floor stairs. They go about halfway up, have a landing, and turn the other way and go up the remaining way. When I shine my light over the stairs, I swear I can see movement out of the corner of the basement. I freak out and pull away, telling them that we should not go into the house, and definitely not into the basement. The guys laugh at me, and there's a hot girl there, so I decide we can go in, but not through the basement. We loop the house again, and find the back door is boarded up, but not as well as the others, and we could probably pry it off with some effort. Eventually we do, and we get inside the creepy house. Now, this house has no drywall, no insulation, nothing. Just the outer boards to the walls, and the studs in the wall. We walk around the entire first floor, and the only thing that we find is a fridge. Everyone wants to open it. Eventually, they do, and it's empty. I was so relieved at this point, and glad we were about to leave, before the bravest of us decided that he wanted to venture into the basement. I spent a solid 5 minutes trying to convince him not to go. It didn't work, and he decided to go for it. As he gets to the stairs and starts shining his light onto the landing, we all heard a crazy laugh coming from within the basement. Everyone freaks out. The girl screams. I scream. The guys scream. The bravest guy drops his phone right at the top of the stairs, and it bounces down to the bottom, right to the landing. We shine our flashlight down and see that the battery has come out of his phone, and the back plate of his phone is about 1 step up from the landing towards us. No one is willing to go down for it, so we decide to peace out of there and run away all the way home and freak out. No one knows what to do, but we decide to go back during the day. The next day, in order to get his phone back. We get very little sleep, and ended up coming back to the house at around 2 p.m. This time, we came back with my older brother. We all go into the house, see the fridge, and make it to the basement stairs. Once we make it to the stairs, we notice 2 things. First, my brother was gone, and secondly, the phone was gone. Then, the terrible stench of something rotting and decaying began to fill the house. We heard my brother shout, Shit. So we ran over to him. He had opened the fridge, and in it was a cat that was dead for what looked like at least a week. It was covered in maggots and just plain disgusting. On the top shelf of the fridge, right above the cat, was my friend's phone. We grabbed it and noped the hell out of there and never came back. I grew up in a house that was haunted. We no longer live there, but my parents owned the house for over 15 years. Growing up, we would hear and see a number of things that are most definitely not explained. Here are a few examples. I once heard heavy footsteps walking around my house whilst I was in bed, only to have them stop at my door, and then it went dead silent. Multiple people, unknown to each other, all independently saw a small boy walking in and out of particular bedrooms. Multiple people saw a man wandering the house throughout the years, and my brother actually put his hand through him in fear and in defense after he woke to him watching him sleeping. These are some examples of what we've dealt with. One day, driving home, I noticed an elderly neighbor working her garden and decided to stop and ask her some questions. Primarily, who lived there before us, and had she heard of anything occurring? She mentioned she'd been in the neighborhood for over 60 years, but never knew who lived in that house, because it never lasted more than a couple of months. The original owners rented it for a decade, and no one would last. She mentioned she was surprised my family had been there so long. I never mentioned our outer-worldly guests, but I got the hint that she knew. So yes, these things do happen. People will quickly vacate. The house gave off strange vibes and sat vacant for some 5 years until someone recently purchased it.